Welcome. You've found your way here, at the end of a long day. Wherever you are, perhaps beneath warm blankets, or watching moonlight spill across your window, pain now is the time to drift away, not just into sleep, but into the quiet echoes of the past. Tonight, we'll step back into the medieval world. A world of thick wooden beams and soot-blackened hearths, of steady hammering in the distance and the gentle hiss of iron meeting water. This is not the story of kings or crusades. It is the story of a man, or rather, many men, the blacksmiths, those whose calloused hands shaped the very bones of medieval life. Though often forgotten in the shadows of history, their work rang through every village square. Their sweat, their skill, and their rhythm shaped the tools, the weapons, and the hinges on every wooden door. But life for a medieval blacksmith was far from easy. And so, gently now, with no need to rush, we begin our story not with fire and noise, but with a quiet moment. Imagine yourself in a medieval village, sometime in the 13th century. Imagine it is early morning in a small medieval village. The sky has just begun to pale, streaked with the first faint hints of dawn-soft lilac and muted gold. The air is still cool, touched with the scent of damp earth and smoke from the few hearths already lit. Somewhere in the heart of this village, a blacksmith's forge begins to stir. It is a squat stone building, simple. Unadorned, its roof heavy with thatch and its walls darkened from years of smoke and flame. There is a single wooden door, swollen slightly from years of damp and heat. And when it creaks open, it reveals a world apart from the quiet calm of the village outside. Inside the forge, the air is still, heavy. It carries the scent of coal dust, singed wool, and faintly, of iron. Not the cold, sterile metal of modern factories, but the warm, earthy scent of raw iron, like a distant thunderstorm caught in stone. The blacksmith enters alone. He is a man of middle years, strong, but no longer young. His tunic is stained from years of ash and sweat. His hands wide, cracked, and blackened at the fingertips move with slow purpose. He moves first to the hearth. It has gone cold overnight, but embers still sleep beneath the ash. He kneels, takes a handful of dry straw, and feeds it gently into the coals. A few careful pulls of the bellows, and there it is again, life in the fire. It starts as a breath, then a glow, then a whisper of flame. He adds wood weights, then charcoal. With each movement, the light grows stronger, casting flickering patterns across the blackened walls. The forge begins to wake. He pulls on the bellows, again, long, steady strokes. The fire deepens, glows red. then orange, then brighter still, until it pulses like a second sun in the dim space. Outside, the village is just beginning to stir. A rooster calls once, twice. A door creaks open somewhere down the lane. A mother murmurs to a child. A dog trots past the forge's open shutters, pausing to sniff the air. But inside, time moves differently. Here, the blacksmith's day has begun. He begins with a plowshare bent from the stony fields. It's brought to him by a farmer the evening before quiet man, hands as cracked as his own. He takes the iron in tongues careful, not to touch the searing metal, laces it in the coals. It rests there, drinking heat. Slowly, gently, it begins to glow. A dull red first, then a brighter orange, not too hot, not too fast. The iron must soften, not burn. He moves to the anvil, its surface scarred and smooth from countless strikes. He positions the iron and raises the hammer. Clang, pause, clang, 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 pause. The sound is not sharp, not piercing. It is dull, slow, rhythmic, like a drumbeat in the belly of the earth, like the heartbeat of an old world. The apprentice arrives a short while later. A boy of 13, perhaps 14, thin-armed and quiet. He moves carefully, unsure but eager, his clothes already dusted with ash from the day before. The blacksmith nods once no words exchanged. The boy fetches more charcoal, sweeps the floor, oils the tongs. These early tasks are as much about rhythm as they are about work. The forge has its own pace, and one must learn to move within it. Later, a woman arrives. She stands at the doorway with a basket in her arms, singes snapped from the cellar door. She waits, does not step inside. The forge is a world of its own. She simply places the basket down, nods, and leaves with the same quiet care. The blacksmith repairs the hinges by late morning. He works slowly, adjusting the iron's shape with practiced movements, never careless. He places the finished pieces in a shallow wooden box, marked with charcoal. Done. By now, the fire is roaring bellows, working in long, slow intervals. The heat presses against the skin like a thick, invisible blanket. The hammer's handle grows warm to the touch. The apprentice watches, wide eyes, as the master shapes a set of nails, small, sharp, perfect in their simplicity. 100 nails, all made by hand, no two precisely alike, yet all with the same purpose. Outside, the village grows louder. Children run, carts creak, and somewhere, someone plays a pipe. But inside, the forge holds its own silence beneath the hammer's rhythm. Clang, clang, pause, turn, clang, again. There is something sacred in it. At midday, the blacksmith steps outside. He stands in the shade, wiping his brow with a cloth darkened from years of use. The boy brings water in a wooden bucket. The blacksmith drinks slowly, deliberately. His breath is heavy but calm. They do not speak much. Words aren't needed. In the afternoon, a knight's messenger arrives. The manor requires new horseshoes, 6 in total. 1 for the old warhorse with the uneven gait. The blacksmith listens, nods, says little. He has worked for the manor for years, shoeing their horses, repairing their gates. Sometimes he is paid in coin, other times in barley or wool. He shapes the shoes carefully, just in each for weight, for curve, for balance. He adds small grooves to one, so it grips better in soft earth. These details matter. A wrong shoe can ruin a horse. By early evening, the fire begins to wane. The hammer slows. The forge breathes its last heat into the air. The blacksmith and the boy sweep the floor, organize the tools, close the shutters. The anvil is warm. The air is thick. Their arms are tired, but it is a good kind of tired. As the sun sinks below the treetops, they step outside together. The blacksmith looks to the sky, violet now, and scattered with stars. Behind them, the forge is quiet once more. But it will wake again tomorrow, and again the day after that. Because this is the rhythm of the forge, a life of repetition, of fire, of iron, of shaping the world with nothing more than heat and will. Not grand, not celebrated, but steady, and in its own quiet way, noble. There is a quiet understanding among those who live near fire, a patience, a rhythm, a willingness to endure the slow shaping of things. And just as iron is forged from raw or into something useful, so too was a blacksmith made not born, but formed through years of practice and observation. The path to becoming a master of the forge was long and often began in childhood. Imagine a boy of 12, maybe younger. His hands are still soft, his back unbent. He comes from a family of thatchers, or perhaps millers. But he has been sent, perhaps chosen to apprentice, under the village blacksmith. There are no formal contracts, no certificates, only an agreement, spoken or unspoken, between parents and master. The boy will serve, learn, and someday, if he proves himself, he may become something more. The forge is not a school, and the blacksmith is not a gentle teacher. There are no lectures, no chalkboards. Learning happens through action repetition, failure, and long hours of silence. In the early days, the apprentice does not touch iron. He sweeps the floor, hauls water, gathers wood and charcoal, He observes. He listens. He watches how the blacksmith tends the fire, how he knows just when to strike, just when to quench. Some apprentices falter early. The heat overwhelms them. The noise, the weight, the tedium. But others stay. They learn the names of every tool tongs, fuller, drift, hardy. They memorize the parts of a horse's hoof, the balance of a blade, the subtle feel of tempered steel. And slowly, without ever being told they've arrived, they become more than boys. They become blacksmiths in the making. Apprenticeships often lasted 5 to 7 years. During that time, the apprentice would live with the master sleeping, perhaps in a loft above the forge, or in a cramped room in the back, heavy with a scent of coal and oil. Meals were shared. Work was constant. The boy became a part of the household, though rarely treated as family. His time was not his own. His days belonged to the forge. But in that endless repetition, hauling, observing, something else took root: confidence. The apprentice began shaping small pieces, nails, rivets, simple hinges. He learned when the metal was too hot, too cold. He learned to read it not by sight alone, but by feel, by instinct. And always the master watched, not with praise, rarely with correction, but with the quiet scrutiny of someone who had walked the same path decades before. Evenings, the apprentice might oil the tools or count finished goods. By firelight, he would study the master's old pieces, running his fingers along curves and joints, wondering if he, too, would ever make something so perfect. When the apprentice had served his years and shown enough skill, he was no longer a boy and no longer bound. He became a journeyman, literally, one who journeys. In some towns, this was a formal step marked by guild recognition. In others, it was simply understood. He had done his time, and now he would travel. Journeymen moved from village to village, town to town, seeking work under other masters. They carried few belongings, perhaps a wrapped bundle of tools, a hammer passed down, a few coins tucked into a leather pouch. What they gained from travel was invaluable. They learned new techniques, saw different tools, worked with new materials. A forge near the coast might favor boat nails and anchor rings. One near a castle might craft hinges for drawbridges or arrowheads for the garrison. Journeymen were both students and laborers, earning small wages, but gathering knowledge like coal gathers heat. Sometimes they returned to their original master, wiser and steadier. Other times, they sought cities, hoping to apprentice under a gilded smith or even enter a formal blacksmithing brotherhood. And always, in the back of their minds, was one goal: to become a master, to own a forge, to teach in turn. In the larger towns and cities, the blacksmith's path was governed not just by skill, by guilds. Guilds were powerful organizations, part fraternity, part governing council. To an outsider, they might seem like little more than groups of craftsmen sharing wine and stories. But to those within, they were everything. A guild regulated prices, set training standards, resolved disputes. It protected its members from outsiders, shielded its secrets from imitation. To become a guildmaster was not easy. It required more than years at the forge. You needed sponsorship often from 2 or 3 existing masters. You needed to produce a masterpiece, single item that displayed your full skill, submitted for review. If accepted, the smith gained not just title, but independence. He could open his own shop, take apprentices, stamp his name, sometimes literally, into his work. But guilds also controlled the market tightly. Those who did were fined, or worse. In some towns, guilds became small governments unto themselves. They sponsored churches, maintained watchmen, even petitioned local lords on matters of law and trade. Yet, for all their rules and formality, guilds preserved something essential: the lineage of knowledge. They ensured that the blacksmith's art was passed down, not just as skill, but as tradition. And within that structure, a blacksmith's identity was secure. He was not just a laborer. He was part of a heritage, a link in a long chain of fire and iron. Outside the cities and guilds, life was simpler and harder. A blacksmith in a rural village often worked alone, sometimes for decades, without ever seeing another smith. He learned by trial, not by rule. He bartered more than he earned coin. He served farmers, soldiers, clergy, and thieves alike without contracts. Without contracts. There were no guilds to protect him, no inspectors to test his iron. But there was respect, and there was need. Every village required hinges, tools, hooks, hoes, nails. And when something broke, the people came to the blacksmith. He might shoe 20 horses in a week, repair a dozen carts. He might fix a broken scythe, and then forge a candle holder in the same afternoon. There was no prestige, no audience, but there was purpose. And for many blacksmiths, that was enough. The teaching forge as a blacksmith aged. His hands grew slower, his back bent, his eyes dimmed, but his forge often lived on. The apprentice now, a journeyman, now a master might return, or a son might take up the hammer as his father had. And so, the fire never truly died. The forge passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. In this quiet continuity, there was comfort. The same anvil, the same bellows, the same hearthstone might serve dozens of men across a century. They shaped the world, and in turn were shaped by it. Not with fame, not with riches, but with quiet dignity. And so, from apprentice to journeyman to master, the blacksmith's path was not a climb upward, but a circle, a return, a repetition. Each generation repeating the same steps, watching, waiting, striking iron when the time was right. No single name was etched into history, but their work lasted in the hinges of doors that still creak open, in the weathered iron gates that still stand, in the stories passed quietly from father to son, from master to apprentice. Their path was one of fire, of patience, of rhythm. And it began not with greatness, but with a boy, standing quietly at the door of a forge, ready to learn. The blacksmith's life left few written words. He did not often write letters. His name rarely appeared in chronicles. His legacy was not carried in songs or scrolls, but in iron, in what he shaped and what he left behind, buried quietly beneath centuries of earth. And so, today, it is not through stories that we come to know him, but through fragments. A rusted horseshoe, warped and thin from years of use. A twisted nail lodged in the timbers of a sunken cottage. The shattered blade of a farming sickle, unearthed beside the bones of a forgotten ox. These pieces speak quietly, but they speak. Archaeologists, kneeling carefully in the dust of old foundations, often find traces of the forge knot as grand structures, but as subtle signs. A charred layer of soil, rich with blackened flecks of charcoal, clumps of slag, the waste material left behind when impurities are burned from raw iron. Burnt bone, sometimes used to temper steel or to create precise levels of carbon in the metal. And now and then, an anvil base, worn smooth, resting exactly where it was last used hundreds of years ago. Unlike castles or cathedrals, the blacksmith's workspace was modest, but the evidence it leaves is unmistakable. At the edge of a medieval English village, a forge might appear as a shallow, rectangular footprint, maybe 10 feet across. The hearth still present, will be nothing more than stones, darkened from heat, but in the soil around it, bits of iron, curved scraps of what might have been tools, nails, blades, all buried like whispers beneath the grass. And in those pieces, a picture begins to form. The blacksmith's tools were not mass-produced. Each was made by hand, sometimes by the smith himself. And because they were treasured, they were often repaired, again and again, until they simply could not be used anymore. It's why archaeologists rarely find a blacksmith's hammer intact. Instead, they find handles long gone to rot, and heads worn down to curious lumps of iron. Still, the shapes are familiar. A crossbeam hammer used for drawing out long shapes, a punch used for piercing holes, A chisel, dulled by centuries, but once sharp enough to split iron. Sometimes they find tonsal shapes and sizes, curved for gripping rods, flat for holding sheets, forked for horseshoes, and the nails, countless nails, each one different, some long and square, 4 beams, others short and stubby, for furniture or barrels. And though they're coated in rust now, when first forged, they gleamed with oil and heat, still warm to the touch. In certain preserved villages, like those reconstructed in Scandinavia or Germany's scholars have recreated, what a blacksmith's home and forge may have looked like. The forge itself was simple, a stone hearth central to the room, a hole or window in the ceiling, letting smoke drift upward, an anvil mounted on a tree stump, bellows made from wood and leather, attached to a pipe that fed air to the flame. There was often no chimney, only a smoke hole above, which filled the space with a lingering haze. The walls were dark. Everything smelled of ash and sweat and iron, and yet, for the blacksmith, it was home. But not every item is easy to explain. Some pieces, found buried deep, defy classification. A twisted iron spiral, perhaps ceremonial. An axe head, too delicate for war, too sharp for farming. A series of iron rings, set in a perfect circle, buried near a well. Some suggest these were offerings. Others believe they were early tools, lost to time. Still others wonder if they carried symbolic meaning, protection, status, or connection to the divine. Because in many cultures, the blacksmith was more than a laborer. He was something. Other, feared, respected, even whispered about. Fire has always had a dual nature. It gives life and it destroys. And the man who controlled fire, the one who could take cold, lifeless stone and make it bend, glow, and sing, was often seen as a bridge between worlds. In Celtic tradition, the smith was associated with Bridget, the goddess of healing, poetry, and the forge. In Norse mythology, the dwarves' masters of metal were not small and silly, but powerful beings who forged Mjolnir, the hammer of Thor. In West African cultures, blacksmiths were often part of spiritual castes. Their work was seen as sacred, hidden, even dangerous. And across medieval Europe, stories of enchanted swords and cursed armor often began in the forge. Whether reality or myth, the idea endured. That forging metal was not just labor, was transformation. And the one who did it, the blacksmith, walked between the physical and the unseen. There are whispers of charms hidden in the 4 giant symbols nailed above the hearth to ward off evil. Bones buried beneath the anvil for strength. Even horseshoes nailed upside down to catch and trap bad luck. These weren't just superstitions. They were the blacksmith's way of maintaining balance in a world that respected the unknown. Even today, remnants of this remain. The idea that a horseshoe over a door brings good fortune, or that iron simple, iron can keep away spirits. The forge was a place of power, not loud or dramatic, but steady, ancient, quietly alive. Archaeologists sometimes find the remains of blacksmiths buried with their tools, not as wealthy men, but not as paupers either. One grave in Central Europe, dated to the 10th century, revealed a man laid to rest beside his anvil, hammer, and tongs. His spine was worn, his wrists thickened from long years of repetition. His tools were worn but well kept, a sign of pride. It is easy to imagine that even in death he was honored for what he had made, for the gates and nails and blades that outlived him. In some old folk tales, it's said you can still hear the sound of hammering in certain woods on quiet nights. Not thunder, not wind, but steady tapping, the echo of a forge long gone, a blacksmith still working, long after the fire has died. The blacksmiths of the Middle Ages did not build monuments. They didn't write books or fight in famous battles, but they left behind the tools others used to build, to fight, to live. And their traces are everywhere. In the beams of barns, held with handmade nails, in the iron rings of ancient wells, in the gates of abbeys, once polished, now rusted with age. Each small object forgotten by name, but remembered in shape, is a signature, a mark of hands that worked quietly, daily, endlessly. Even now, the forge lives on. There are those who still keep the craft alive, modern blacksmiths who shape iron not for need, but for beauty or preservation. They study the old methods. They recreate tools based on fragments. They use bellows instead of fans, coal instead of propane. And when they strike the anvil, the sound is no different from what it was 800 years ago. Clang, clang, turn, clang, again. It is the same rhythm, the same fire, the same quiet devotion. In museums, these items rest behind glass still, silent. But in the forge, they come alive again. And in the archaeologist's careful brushstroke, in the museum's dim light, in the blacksmith's echoing hammer, we find them. Not just tools, not just metal, but echoes, faint but real. A blacksmith's legacy, still humming softly beneath the noise of time. When the years of apprenticeship came to an end, the young blacksmith stood at a quiet threshold. He had learned the fire, learned the iron, but now came the part with no teacher, no guidance, only the road. This was the life of the journeyman. Not yet a master, no longer an apprentice, he stood somewhere in between. With calloused hands and modest tools, he stepped beyond the village of his youth, into a wider world of forged fires and unfamiliar faces. The road ahead was not paved, and often not kind. He walked it with his hammer wrapped in cloth, a small bundle over one shoulder, and coinsif stitched into the lining of his tunic. He sought out other forges, other masters, not to return to servitude, but to practice, learn, and survive. Each forge taught something new. Another in hinges, the journeyman had no forge of his own. He rented space, borrowed bellows, and earned pay by the piece. Some nights, he slept in barns or stables. Other nights, beneath the stars, with an anvil stone for a pillow. The rhythm was not easy, but it was his. He might spend weeks in one village repairing plows and sharpening scythes. Then, just as quickly, he would move undriven by the need to earn, or simply to see what lay ahead. Some kept journals, scraps of parchment filled with diagrams, sketches of tools, recipes for quenching mixtures, charcoal blends. Most did not write at all. Their knowledge lived in the muscles of the arm, the feel of metal under a hammer, the instinct to judge a glowing hue. This stage of life could last years or decades. Some journeymen never became masters, but for those who dared, there remained a singular goal: to be accepted by the guild. In cities and larger towns, blacksmithing was not free. It was guarded, regulated, controlled by the guild's old and powerful bodies that decided who could forge, what they could sell, and at what price. To be outside the guild was to be vulnerable. One could work, but not openly, not safely. Guilds were exclusive, sometimes secretive. They held charters from kings or bishops. They set standards for tools, wages, and apprenticeships. They mediated disputes, cared for widows, and buried their own. But above all, they preserved the lineage of mastery. Becoming a gilded master, smith was not just a title. It was an arrival, a homecoming, and it was earned, never given. To join a guild, the journeyman had to submit a masterpiece, single object, forged entirely by hand, without assistance, and judged by senior masters. It could be a lock, a dagger, a pair of symmetrical hinges, or an ornate iron gate. The choice depended on the region, the guild, and the smith's own strengths. But it had to be perfect. The iron had to be pure, the shape elegant, the balance exact. Not merely functional, but a reflection of full command over fire and metal. Some failed. Their pieces warped, cracked, or lacked refinement. They returned to the road, quietly, perhaps never to try again. Others passed, and with that approval came recognition, not just from the guild, but from the entire community of craftsmen. With guild membership came privileges, the right to open one's own forge, to take on apprentices, to stamp one's initials or mark onto finished works, to sell goods in town markets without fear of penalty. It also came with obligations, dues, paid in coin or kind, attendance at guild meetings, often held in candlelit halls, participation in festivals, processions, or charity work, voting on guild matters, disputes, admissions, regulations. Guild members wore special garments during ceremonies, dark woolen cloaks with brass buttons or leather aprons embossed with the guild's sigil. Their tools were inspected annually. Their apprentices were tested periodically. Standards were enforced not with harshness, but with tradition. Because to fail in one's craft was not just shameful, it threatened the honor of the guild. A guild hall was not always grand. Sometimes it was a low stone building beside the market square, with a long wooden table, candle stubs, and a single iron chest that held the ledger, cube. Other times, it was more elaborate, tall beamed ceilings, banners of red and gold, carved benches. But wherever it stood, it was sacred space, a place where knowledge passed. Rules were made, and history quietly preserved. Here, journeymen recited oaths, masters debated prices. Old records were kept ledgers with names and stamps going back generations. And when a blacksmith died, it was here that his tools were weighed, his debts tallied, and his story gently folded into the greater book of the guild. The guild offered something rare in the medieval world: security. If your forge was robbed, the guild could pursue justice. If you fell ill, they might send coin or food to your family. If you were accused of faulty work, they would inspect and defend if they found you in the right. It was not a union in a modern sense, but it was a brotherhood. There were feasts, to nights when the forge was dark and ale flowed freely. Songs were sung low, rhythmic verses about fire, metal, and long winters. Stories of great forges, terrible burns, clever repairs. Laughter over tongues dropped, sparks caught in beards. And in those moments, the blacksmith was not just a laborer. He was part of a long, unbroken chain. Yet, not every blacksmith belonged to a guild. Many, especially in rural villages, worked independently outside the city walls, beyond guild control. Some chose this path, others had no choice. They were seen as lesser by city guilds, but often they were more versatile. They did everything: tool repair, horseshoeing, ornament, fencing, blades. They took payment in wheat, goats, wool, whatever the locals could offer. They answered to no charter, no council, only the rhythm of their work, only the sound of hammer on metal. And though they lacked the status of gilded smiths, they held something different intimacy with their communities. Trust built from decades of quiet, essential labor. Journeymen came and went. Some became masters, some did not. But each left traces, small rings of iron, hinges stamped with a quiet mark, locks that still turn after centuries. And the guilds, for all their rules, kept those names alive. Some still do. In the libraries of old European towns, you can still find the records. Hans, son of Otto, admitted to the guild in 1423. Michael of Lubeck, journeyman in good standing, granted permission to forge tools. Annika of Prague accepted as master smith. A few women recorded these names, whisper from the parchment, soft but clear. And they remind us that every hammer strike, every glowing bar, every perfect hinge was made by someone who once walked the same dusty roads, who once hoped for recognition, for permanence, for a forge of their own. As the blacksmith lifted his hammer to strike the glowing metal, the distant sound of hooves might echo down the lane. A nobleman rode past. His cloak, deep blue and lined with fur, caught the wind. His boots gleamed. The horse beneath him, well fed, muscled, and immaculately groomed, tossed its mane as if aware of its importance. The nobleman did not slow as he passed the forge. He did not dismount or wave. He had no need to, and the blacksmith did not expect him to. Their worlds were separate, both necessary, but separate. In the medieval world, society was not merely divided, was layered. At the top stood the nobility, dukes, barons, knights. Beneath them, the clergy. Then merchants, guildsmen, peasants. And somewhere in that chain, neither high nor low, but apart, was the blacksmith. He was respected, but not powerful, essential, but not influential. The land on which the forge sat did not belong to him. It belonged to the Lord. The manor lord his title, inherited his wealth, accumulated through taxes, rents, and war. Spoils often never entered the forge. And if he did, it was as a customer, never as a peer. While the blacksmith lived in a timber cottage beside his forge, with soot-stained beams and a hearth that never fully cooled, the noble lived elsewhere. The manor house stood apart in a hill or behind a stone wall. It had glazed windows, small, thick panes of imported glass. Its floors were paved with stone or tiled in patterns. The walls were adorned with tapestries, hunting scenes, saints, stories from Rome and Jerusalem. The noble dined at a long oaken table beneath iron chandeliers the blacksmith himself might have crafted, though he would never eat beneath them. Meals included roast meat, imported spices, bread made from fine white flour. And while the blacksmith chewed slowly on oatcakes and cabbage stew, the Lord was offered game birds, honeyed fruits, and cups of spiced wine. The noble was born into expectation. He was taught to ride, to speak Latin, to judge wine, to host guests. His life was public, marked by ceremony. The blacksmith, by contrast, was private. His work was practical, his knowledge unadorned. No herald announced his birth, no records preserved his words, and yet he, too, carried weight, not of appearances, but of iron, heat, and burden. If you looked at their hands, the difference was unmistakable. The Lord's fingers were ringed in silver or gold, smooth from parchment and reins. The blacksmiths were broad, darkened, shaped by tools. Where the noble gestured, the smith gripped. Where the noble pointed, the smith held. Their clothing, too, told the story. A noble's tunic was dyed-woad, madder, saffron colors, expensive and regulated by law. His shoes curled at the toes. His belt gleamed with brass. The blacksmith wore wool, linen, or leather dark, undecorated. Clothes were for protection, not impression. No one ever asked what the blacksmith wore to a feast, because he rarely attended one. And when war broke out, as it often did, in medieval life each man faced it differently. The noble rode at the head of a retinue, armored in plate or chain, with a surcoat bearing his family crest. His sword was well forged, balanced, perhaps even named. The blacksmith remained behind, or, if conscripted, he marched as a foot soldier, without horse, without heraldry. Or perhaps he stayed, working at the forge, repairing arms, mending armor, shaping arrowheads by the hundreds. He might hear, days later, that the noble's banner had fallen, or that he had won a small victory and returned with spoils. But it changed little for the smith. His fire still needed tending. His anvil still waited. It would be wrong to say the noble disrespected the blacksmith. In fact, many admired his skill, especially when swords were needed or horses limped. But admiration does not mean equality. To the Lord, the smith was like the wheelwright, the cooper, the mason, important, yes, but not of his world. He did not dine with him, did not marry into his family, did not ask his advice on matters of land or law. Yet in quiet moments, perhaps even the nobleman sensed that the iron hinge which held his castle gate, or the blade he trusted in battle, carried within it the touch of a man who lived in suit, not silk. In the manner, the night might end with song and laughter, wine flowing, lutes playing. The Lord seated at the head of the table, guests toasting his name. In the forge, the night ended differently. The fire dimmed, the tools were wiped clean. The blacksmith stepped outside into the dark, his arms tired, his back stiff. He listened not to music, but to the hiss of cooling metal, the sigh of trees in wind. And yet, there was peace, not triumph, not celebration. Centuries later, archaeologists find evidence of both men. From the noble, they find carved tombs, seals, heraldic rings, and fragments of chainmail. A banner, perhaps long faded but still intact. From the blacksmith, they find tools, an anvil worn smooth, a hammer, its handle long gone, nails bent in haste, a chisel blade cracked, horseshoes buried near foundations. The noble's name is etched in stone, the blacksmith's in iron, one commemorated, the other remembered in use. Because while few can name the smith who forged a hinge, that hinge might still open a door 700 years later. In the end, both men served a greater rhythm. The noble through law, war, and governance. The blacksmith through labor, patience, and fire. One ruled the land. The other held the tools that built it. One spoke in orders, the other in strikes of steel. Their lives were different, but both were marked by duty, and both, in their own way, faded into time. The fire has long gone cold. The forge sits quiet, its stone hearth darkened with time. There are no sparks now, no clangs, no rising heat against the skin, only stillness and silence. But if you listen, truly listen, there is something that remains. A rhythm, faint but steady. A memory, echoing like a distant heartbeat through the walls of time. The blacksmith's work was not made to be admired. It was made to be used. A latch on a barn door. The loop of a cauldron hook. The hinge that keeps a chapel window from rattling in the wind. He did not sign these pieces, did not mark them with flourishes or poems, but his touch is there in the curve of a joint, the tightness of a rivet, the angle of a blade. He did not ask to be remembered, and yet he was, not in marble or gold, but in function, in the way a chest still opens after centuries, in the lock that still clicks, in the gate that still swings with the grace of iron long cooled. Travel across Europe through the cobbled streets, the timbered cottages of the English countryside, the hilltop towns of Tuscanan, you will still see his legacy. An old church door, its bolts black with age. A well, its rim lined in hand-forged rings. A farmhouse, great, scorched, but still intact. No plaque tells you who made them. There is no fanfare. No fanfare is needed, because the work speaks for itself. It says, I was made to last. I was shaped by hands who understood fire. And in that quiet endurance, the blacksmith lives on. There's something humbling in that kind of legacy. To shape things, not for applause, but for purpose. To know that your work may never be admired, only needed. The blacksmith didn't chase fame. He chased the perfect weld, the balanced blade, the nail that would not bend. And there is a kind of nobility in that. The nobility of quiet repetition, of devotion to one's craft, of showing up each day rain or frost, because the gate must close, the horses must walk, the cart must hold. He did not write sermons, did not command soldiers, but he held the village together in iron and will. In time, the image of the blacksmith blurred, fused with myth. He became more than a man. He became the figure at the edge of the firelight, half craftsman, half sorcerer, the one who knew the secret of turning stone to blade, flame to strength. In Norse stories, it was dwarves in deep caverns, forging weapons for gods. In medieval legends, it was enchanted forges where swords whispered with souls. In African oral tradition, the blacksmith held a spiritual power, the authority to shape not just metal, but fate. Even in modern folk belief, we hang horseshoes over doors, not for function, but for fortune. Somewhere along the way, the blacksmith became both real and symbolic, both man and myth. And still, in small corners of the world, the forge lives. Modern blacksmiths keep the rhythm alive, not because something ancient calls them to it. They strike the anvil with deliberate care. They shape blades, hinges, tools, sculptures. Some work in museums, recreating medieval techniques, folding steel as their ancestors did. Using bellows powered by hand and foot, others do it for art, or for quiet, or for the love of transformation. But all of them, whether they know it or not, stand in the shadow of those who came before. They follow the same pattern: clang, quench, breathe. And in that repetition, the past returns.